Hello, everybody. Great to have you here. Thanks for tuning in. I have Dennison, an amazing founder from Tally. Great to have you.
Thank you. Great being here.
You have an amazing journey. Tell me how it got started.
My co-founder and I, we used to sit next to one another in a co-working space here in New York called Crypto NYC back in 2017 when all the sort of ICO projects were coming through New York and trying to pitch us on a token for X, right? And that was very exciting. It was a great time. We always spent lunch just like pitching one another ideas about like what we would build, what we wanted to build, what we could work on. And all our DAO teams would come in, building some sort of like DAO framework. And we were very excited about that. I personally was also very, very excited about this idea of like how we could maybe reorganize society on the blockchain. But at the time, it felt very much kind of like we were doing co-ops on the blockchain, right? You were kind of making these organizations that seemed really nice in principle, but it wasn't really clear why anyone would participate. There wasn't like a really clear problem, right? Mm-hmm. So fast forward a number of years, and Compound launched the Comp token, right? And they created the first version of the now dominant smart contract framework for DAOs called Governor. It was called Governor Alpha. And that was a very clear moment where my co-founder and I, Raf, we said, okay, now we actually need DAOs, right? Because we had a protocol, a smart contract protocol, that had revenue, right? And it had many users, and it needed many levers to be pulled on it, right? That's a real use case for a DAO, right? And that's a use case for something that's also like native to the layer, right? Like the smart contracts that would intermediate the political decision makings of humans would control a smart contract protocol. It made sense. We weren't using some on-chain framework to control something far away that was off-chain or something like that. The linkage was direct. The smart contract could control this protocol directly. So it was clear that, okay, now there's an opportunity for DAOs, and all of DeFi is going to need this, right? When we looked at how people were actually doing the governance, it was hard. Right? Like there's a hodgepodge of spreadsheets and like Notion documents and like Telegrams and Slacks and stuff like that. And it was like, okay, this actually needs tooling, right? That for DAOs to work, for DAOs to scale, to go beyond maybe just like the initial, rather large team of individuals across the internet who made something happen, but to just like hundreds of thousands of people, we were going to need a lot of tooling that would actually like intermediate the trust between all these parties that were participating. So that's really where the idea for Tally came. We went through a lot of different names before we got to Tally. But it was like, okay, let's build the tooling for it, and we're going to build around this primitive that was called Governor Alpha. And the reason for building around that primitive, which has proven very successful, is we've thought about what led to the boom of DeFi, right? Like what enabled DeFi to happen. And fundamentally, it was the ERC20 standard. Right, standardization around the token. The ERC20 standard made finance, or this idea of like tokenization, a standard. And out of that, DeFi just exploded. Right now you have the standard, your thing you could build could interact with anyone else's thing. Wow, took off. But governance had a similar problem, right? When you looked across the ecosystem, there were a lot of governance types. There's a lot of different frameworks for governance, a lot of different kinds of smart contracts, a lot of teams. Maker, for example, they had to roll their own, right? People were constantly kind of building new things, and every time people participated in it, it worked totally differently, right? The tooling for it was totally different. You had this problem where, okay, now we have governance, but it doesn't really work, and nobody knows how to use it, and it's not really portable, and we can't translate across like the different things that we are actually working with. So what do we do? Our real early thesis was, okay, we are going to lean into supporting Governor. Make this a standard. I used to be at OpenZeppelin. I worked with the OpenZeppelin folks, say, hey, let's standardize this, right? Because the theory was, okay, if we have a standard building block for governance, then everyone will know how it works. It'll be like a common meme. People understand, and it'll explode. And sure enough, that's what happened. It got standardized, added to the OpenZeppelin library. Now, when you went and you got your ERC20 token for your project, you also went and you got your governance for your token in your project, right? So it all came together. It's very standard, very clear, and then Tally really exploded in terms of like, okay, now that we have this, the obvious place to go is go manage this on Tally. But also, it enabled lots of other people to build interfaces, right? And what that meant was now when you talk to folks about governance, when you would say, as a company going to someone and say, okay, use Governor and use Tally, you didn't have to fight the danger of platform lock-in, right? And this is very important because most teams that were building some sort of like DAO framework, they would go, use us, and then we build a framework. And that was its own little isolated world, right? It's like somebody creating a new type of token that doesn't, you can't use it on Uniswap, you can't trade it, you can't get, do a loan off of it. What happened was you could always say to clients, and clients could always feel comfortable because it's just like, okay, we use Tally, it's the best interface. But there's options. If Tally were to go out of business, if we decided we didn't like Dennison, we could always go and use some alternative. It's an open framework. And that really contributed to now the growth of people building other kinds of tools on top of it, right? People have now basically stopped building new frameworks and started to innovate within Governor.
Pretty cool. So you saw that there was this need to standardize it. Let's go ahead and standardize was the next step. And then from there, it was, let's build a company around it. The standard is in place. Let's onboard more users to the standard.
Yeah, exactly. We were doing the two in tandem. It was like, we're standardizing it and we're showing why it should be standardized at the same time. Yeah. Making a real building block.
Indeed. And who were the first batch of users?
So the first two DAOs that really went hard with Compound's Governor was Compound and Uniswap, right? Like Compound had its own interface. At the time, Uniswap had built a tool called Sybil. They had their own interface. And one of our theories is that foundations and teams will always want to build their own tooling, right? Because they'll always want, like DAOs have this sort of thing where they like to invest in themselves and they like to invest in their community. And one of the easiest things to do is invest in building more tooling for themselves. But it's very difficult to really do that at a very high level for a long time because you need to continue to get funding for these things. You need to continue to upgrade, continue to follow this path. So we support Compound and Uniswap, and over time, the people who use Compound and the people who use Uniswap, right? There's this world where they use Compound, but then they have to go travel over and use Uniswap tooling. They come to Tally, and now they don't have to do that. Right? They are using Compound and Uniswap in the same place, right? And then more DAOs start to appear. So as more DAOs start to appear, you get this sort of mass of people coming who are saying, well, okay, I can take what I know and how it works, and I can move it over here, then I can move it over here. And then people were saying, oh, I'm building a new DeFi project. How do I do governance? And people say, well, look at what Uniswap is doing, what's Compound doing, and then go use Tally. And we made it permissionless so people could just come add their DAOs.
So if the standards are open, why do they need Tally?
So again, I used to run a startup called Dapp Hero. And one of the taglines that I used to use was, if you need to build the thing you need to build in order to build the thing you want to build, that's the thing you're building. And that really applies very clearly with things like DeFi protocols.
Lots of things to build.
Lots of things to build.
Yeah.
Right.
State of the industry.
State of the industry. State of the industry. The smart contracts being open is critical, right? Tally cannot be the strategic risk or systemic risk of the ecosystem where if I decide that I want to go fish and do pottery, now everybody's screwed, right? It can't be that, right? We need to have an ecosystem that is able to grow and flourish for our company to have a market opportunity that's actually worth pursuing, right? Because otherwise we'd just be consultants, right? There's plenty of really excellent, talented teams who build exactly what a foundation or exactly what a core team wants to build, right? But that's not scalable. That's not a venture scale opportunity, and that's not plus EV for the entire ecosystem, right? Because when a foundation goes and says, okay, I'm going to build this type of tooling, or a core team says, I'm going to build this type of tooling, or Nouns DAO is fantastic, right? They give grants for tons of different projects to build this kind of tooling, right? The end product isn't, oh, I've created this tooling for this foundation, and it's a great experience for the competing foundation, right? It's focused on this one foundation, so you lose the network effects that a tool like Tally has. You lose the ecosystem that a tool like Tally has.
So some of what's built is by nature not open sourceable.
No, I mean, it can be open source. I think it doesn't have to be open source. There's plenty of tooling in the space that is open source.
Right.
I think it's more at scale, what can you do, right? So a great example is the early version of Aragon's app, which had really turned me on early on to the promise of subgraphs in the graph protocol, where Aragon's app reads directly from the blockchain, right? It's entirely decentralized as a front end, right? It just reads all the data about the proposals from the blockchain. So what that means is you load it up for the first time and it has to sync. Right? It has to go through the blockchain and parse these transactions. So day one, it's very fast. But 5 years later, it is not fast anymore. Now it's very slow.
Yeah.
Right? So now what we have to do for apps like Tally is that you have to build these big indexers. Right? You have to build this like internal view of the global state on your own machines, which is very, very large, right? For the pitch is, again, but you don't have to. You can still have something else that's simple and easy to use if that's something you want. So you're not ever like locked in.
Right. So if it's not locked in, and mainly not locked in because of open source, availability of standards and execution, this is just an easier way to get into something that you have ultimate power to retain. And the immediate benefit is clear that it's super easy to onboard your own governance module this way.
Yeah.
And it also helps you source now variety of service providers, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it's become a common method for DAO service providers to actually solicit business as well.
Exactly.
So how did that turn happen? It seems like we went from the intermediation ability to marketplace. So when does it take that turn in this journey?
You know, I think in our journey, there's a point where you start to have the network effects take over, right? Where service providers can sell into one organization, and then they can sell into another organization, and then they take the history of how they sold into these other organizations, they take it on Tally and they go show another organization as the reason why they should be able to do it for that organization. And communities very much like to follow norms that people have built. So you start to have many different communities that are actually cross-pollinating one another of learnings, right? You know, a great example is, I think, you know, optimism with public goods funding. That is a very popular meme. You see other DAOs doing different versions of it, right? In optimism, that, you know, it's mostly driven by the foundation. But then in Arbitrum, for example, the foundation doesn't do that. And the members of Arbitrum were like, well, we want that kind of thing too. We want some sort of like liquidity program too. Well, let's just create it ourselves, right? So now they've created their own version. It's a version of it, but it's the same kind of idea. And now you have people saying, well, that was really successful. We want that for our DAO. And you see that in Arbitrum, right? They had a first grants program. Most teams only have one grants program, right? Arbitrum is really unique in that there's 2 grants programs. And there's plenty of opportunity to pitch new grants programs if you wanted to, right? So you create this kind of like opportunity to create a lot of economic value, a lot of economic activity, and really unlock these DAOs. Because the default state of a DAO is nothing happens, right? There's a DAO that I created a number of years ago, which I always love to give as an example, called Dope Wars, which was this NFT game. And you know, one of the things I did when I created it, I said like, okay, this is the idea, and we're gonna have this big pot of money, but I'm not the CEO. You have to go figure it out yourselves. And the only way you can unlock the value in this is somehow you figure it out, right? And so at the time, I had a...
The only way you figure it out is you figure it out.
Right? Yeah, but I had this analogy at the time, which was really interesting, is there's this deep hole with a lot of money at the bottom of it. But like no one person can get down there. So what do? You say, help me down there so I can have the money. And you're like, well, no, I'm not gonna help you down there so you can just have the money. So to get the money out, people had to like coordinate on ideas. No one person can just take the money and give it to themselves because no one else is gonna go for that, right? So all they can agree on is what's positive EV for the entire ecosystem. Right? When you go to a big DAO like Arbitrum and you say, hey, let's take $50 million out, you can't say, for me, right? You have to say, well, for all of us, and then people are like, well, I don't just need money. What sort of value does this bring? Well, let's do it as incentives to bring more people here, to use the projects that have made their focus of like being here, this network as their home. Let's give them more firepower to bring more users to use that, and that'll make the entire ecosystem better, and that's net EV for all of us, right? And that's where people start to coordinate. Right? People can coordinate together on something where like, I can't personally extract that value, but as a group, we can collectively extract that value.
That's interesting. I wonder if Tally could be like, here's how to train your DAO. We're gonna come up with these mock scenarios like drills, and if you can't unearth this in 5 days, that value is lost. And then it's like a speed drill of, are you able to respond? And then there's a, you know, a solution to
Yeah.
it, but every time it needs to be engineered slightly differently so that it's not going to cross-learn another DAO solution from it.
Sure.
And then you could be like, well, you qualify to be a Tally customer.
It's an interesting idea. I think we're still too early on to like prescribe what the right way is. We still see people just trying a lot of crazy ideas, which is really wonderful. Right now, we're doing a lot of thinking around things like delegate compensation. This is something that the whole ecosystem is thinking about a lot. Okay, this hive of folks that is like humming around making things happen. How do we reward them? How can we make making these DAOs work a full-time job? You know, there's so many different things that like people are exploring. We wouldn't want to like limit it, but definitely there's a big educational
that was the joke
component.
part of it. I'm not saying only those qualify should be clients, but
Everyone else.
it'd be like, you know, you passed so you get a discount or something. Yeah. As a group, you know how to coordinate yourselves, so you deserve us. You'll carry the flag a little bit.
Carry the flag. Definitely always up for helping to educate.
Okay. Tell me some of the challenges that you faced that you've overcome that might be, you know, common among DAO service providers because you're not finding the right person.
I think that the hardest challenge for any sort of like DAO tooling, well, I think at this point we don't consider Tally really just like a DAO tool. We consider ourselves more like operational infrastructure for Web3. But when we talk about DAO tooling in general, I think the hardest thing is to properly identify the persona, properly identify the value, right? There's a lot of DAO tools that was kind of about like the vibes, right? And in the bear market, vibes are hard to come by, right? Vibes are hard to come by. Like, you know, who is the DAO, right? Is it the foundation? Is it the core team? Is it the delegates? Is it the service providers? Is it the token holders, right? Is it the smart contracts, right? And that can be a very big challenge for different products, right? Where, because not all of these personas need value all the time in the same way, right? So when you target just one of them, in some market conditions, they don't do anything. It's like investment clubs. Investment club DAOs are a great idea. But in a bear market, nobody's investing, right? So your persona...
Which, to their merit, might be the most intelligent thing to be doing.
True, but by nature, those aren't professional investors, right? When you think about like how you target the personas, it's like how are these your persona going to always have a really big problem to solve, right? If you are a consulting shop that serves, you know, a foundation or a core team directly, right? You have to always have a client, and you're always capped on your bandwidth, right? If you are a service provider selling to a DAO, right? For things, for example, it's very popular for a while to do like treasury management, right? You have to have DAOs that need to reinvest their money in lieu of somehow making money, right? So that's kind of specific kind of DAO that like wants to put their treasury into a yield-bearing vault of some point and earn interest. A lot of DAOs, like, you know, again, I use Arbitrum a lot. Each kind of DAO tool that you can imagine has to be really thoughtful about who is the persona, is their problem really big, and do they always have that problem, right? Because
across different DAOs.
Across different DAOs. Do they always have that problem, right? When ETH was dropping, treasury management was a very hot topic, right? Like, oh, we got to get out of ETH, we need to do something, right? And now you have an interesting problem where can you serve the size of your market simultaneously in your market opportunity? Can you serve all of the DAOs that are like freaking out about like the price of ETH going down and want to diversify their treasury at the same time? Right? You're a service provider. You're generally not going to be able to do this. It's not a scaled product, right? And then now we're at the bottom and nobody really wants to get out of ETH, right? Like maybe it's dark outside because we're in the bottom of the bear, but everyone's just like, well, if we're, you know,
can't go any longer.
Can't go any lower. Like we can't sell now. Like we should have sold at like 4,000. Clear it's too late. It's all up from here, baby. Even if it's going to take like a year or two, right? So now where's the persona, right? Like where's your market persona? So, you know, I think ideally you'd probably build a product that could like, you know, swing between those pretty fluidly, right? Or you build a horizontal platform that has network effects, which is the idea behind platforms like Tally, Boardroom, things like that, like where you build this platform that actually serves all these personas in really difficult problems at all times, right? Because some days, the core team is really interested, right? But in many cases, once the core team launches the DAO, they're not so interested anymore, right? They're hands off, right? So that's a hugely valuable persona, but you can serve them only in the very beginning, right? And then you have the foundation that doesn't exist before the DAO is formed. So you can't serve them and the core team at the same time yet because they don't exist yet, right?
So speaking of these as challenges worth overcoming, we were discussing how you scored the first foundations. What was the stage in which you found them?
The thing that we realized early on is to build a platform, it has to be scalable. And to make it scalable, it has to be self-serve, right? All the work that you have to go in to win clients, just like the example with the treasury management, you can't serve everyone at the same time when the market is dropping. To have a venture scale opportunity, you do have to build a platform that can service clients you don't know about, right? And to do that, you have to have self-serve, right? And so most of the DAOs on Tally actually add themselves whenever they want. They don't even tell us, right? And this is important because the core team launches a DAO, but mostly launching a DAO is a really pretty top secret event, right? There's a token coming. We all know what airdroppers will do as soon as they hear that maybe there's a token, right? So you need to have a tool where they know that when they're ready, Tally is ready for them, but they don't have to tell Tally in advance. Now, we actually have to do a lot of work to be able to be sure that they know about us. Imagine if you were going to build a marketplace, but you had to know all the clients who would buy on it and all the people who would sell on it, right? And you would have to contact every one of them in advance. That wouldn't work as a marketplace, right? The doors just have to be open and people have to walk in. Right. Otherwise, it's not actually a large opportunity. So that was a big challenge, just technologically. How do we add folks to it? That was a big part behind the standardization that I spoke about, right? Without standards, you're not going to be able to add everybody's cool new feature, right? Yeah. That's not a great software experience. That's not a great UX experience. There's a lot of challenges in that. People still want to experiment, right?
Sure.
So we see folks coming with new ideas and we're like, well, sorry, we can't support that, but we're making a note and you're the fourth person who asked about it. So now, somewhere on a roadmap, we've bumped up the priority of getting to that feature so that we can support more of this type of organization. So yeah, there are a ton of challenges in building the product. I think if folks are looking to build DAO tools today, I think it's really about understanding what is the scalable need, what is the most difficult challenge that everyone has that you can solve in a scalable way.
In a self-serve is equivalent to scalable in this case?
Yes. It has to be most people are jumpstarting their business as consultancy. And the thing is that that's very hard to get out of, right? Once you are a consultant, you don't have pricing power when you do get around to monetization. You don't have leverage, right? It is consultancy, right? And that's great. That's a great business model. Some of the top
you do
teams
have
in
that
the DAO space.
A leverage, provided you are willing to forego your current client base, which is a tough spot.
That's a tough spot.
Yeah.
That is a very tough spot, right? You basically have to turn on them. I would say if you're going to build some sort of DAO tooling, that is an opportunity to think of what's a really hard problem that the members of these DAOs, the delegates, the core team, the foundations, maybe don't know how to do, right? But they need anyway, right? I think a great example that people...
So who in the DAO is then serving themselves, right? When we talk about this product being self-serve,
So what's really kind of exciting about self-serve on Tally is it doesn't matter who the person is, who the persona is, right? You imagine...
In that you mean it doesn't matter who in a DAO is looking to buy that Tally, or are you saying who in a DAO is interested in buying a service through that Tally?
Either, right? I don't believe it was the Nowners who added Nown's DAO to Tally.
I see.
Someone in Nown's DAO was just I would really like to use Nown's DAO through Tally, and they added it.
Yeah.
Right? that's kind of the special magic now about the permissionless aspect. And that goes back to like you serve all the personas at the same time, right?
Right.
You're a token holder, you're fed up with like some custom interface, you don't have some piece of information that you want about your DAO that you participate in, screw it. You go and you add your DAO to Tally, right? Nobody needs to improve, it's permissionless.
Oh,
right?
that's cool. But then somebody needs to show buy-in to actually go ahead and cast the votes, right?
I mean, the person who added it on to Tally already has the buy-in, right? They can use it, right? Ideally, the platform's so great that people know, so they all go over there, right? Obviously, we see and we do a little marketing. And we be like,
Yeah.
hey, somebody added this, right? But it's permissionless, right? And that's, imagine some other software like, someone signing you up to healthcare benefits. You didn't even know them. They're just like, that guy needs healthcare benefits. You're signed up, It's a pretty...
Actually, there is permission required there.
Yeah, there is.
And so you don't get automatically signed up.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
right? Like most things...
But your DAO can, without your explicit consent, sign
Yeah.
up to Tally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can be like, we don't like Tally, we don't want to use it. Fine, but someone might disagree and put it on Tally anyway.
And then in that case, do they end up using it anyway?
Some of the personas do, right? Like we have to serve all these different personas together. So maybe one persona doesn't like Tally for whatever reason, which happens, happens, right? But the rest of the personas can derive just as much value from it.
Wait, so doesn't that mean until you get to a threshold amount of participants, you're delivering a service that is actually not useful to the DAO?
I mean, it depends on, someone adds it to Tally, right?
Yes.
So the first person adds it to Tally. Now, what you have is service providers who go, oh, there's a new DAO, right? Oh, I like to go sell into that.
Yeah.
There's no way to know that like everybody in that community, for example, maybe doesn't like Tally, right? But now they use Tally to actually sell into that service, right? And maybe they have
Or
another
at least try to, but only...
Or try to.
So then the challenge is it would be a turn-off to them if they found out about a DAO that wasn't internally consistently appreciative of buying on Tally, right? So then this service provider could be trying to pitch a DAO with only 5 out of 1,000 already showing interest on Tally.
Kind of, but it doesn't really matter, right? Because we're an interface operational layer on top of the smart contracts, right? Like really, no matter what interface you do use, the smart contracts are the source of truth.
You're right.
Right? So in this case, it doesn't really matter, right? Like you don't have like hostility because you cast your vote on Tally, right? Like you can cast your vote anywhere you want, right? The idea is that like, we worked very hard to make Tally the most pleasant place to cast your vote, right? And ideally, if you are like this group of professionalized delegates, you get into the habit of using Tally more regularly, right? And then today we have like a really great API, which actually allows third parties to plug into Tally and get information out. So now you get like a distribution thing where you say, maybe I have my own tooling, right? And we're all happy with our tooling, we love this, but we're gonna put our DAO on Tally so that all the integration partners of Tally get access to what our DAO is doing.
Right.
Because if you're another kind of DAO tool that just picks one point where, to your example, like maybe for some reason they don't like Tally, well, now you don't have a customer there. You don't have a client, but now you do. You have something where you solve everyone's problem in some way. And that's what makes it sticky.
Okay, not everybody needs to pre-agree that you're going to use Tally, because that's trying to make an agreement about how you're going to make future agreements. So let's just make the container available to everybody and invite them in. Just by existing, it's an invitation.
And just by existing, we make the ecosystem better.
Right.
So there'll always be DAOs that do their own thing, but that makes the standard of DAOs stronger, that makes the knowledge about using DAOs better, it makes the opportunity for everyone better. So it's fine, you sort of like make everything better.
So want to wrap it up with your vision of the future and how there Tally fits in. And let's fast forward 4 or 5 years.
4 or 5, okay.
In that world, do you envision there will be a lot of DAOs?
Yes.
Instead of new enterprises?
Yes.
Would they be working like co-ops?
Maybe.
Will they have a legal wrapper?
Maybe.
Okay. And what's the average size of a DAO?
I think hundreds of thousands.
Of?
Accounts.
Accounts. Okay. And what are some of the common things they vote about?
reinvesting their earnings, spending money on somehow growth,
Yeah.
spending money on the people that make things happen, get things done, and spending money on selling their services to other DAOs.
I see. Do you anticipate there would be important votes on anything outside of spending money?
Oh yeah, operations, like pull the lever, stop the car, add the this, right? There'll be important votes all the time.
Right.
Oops, sequencer stock, unstick it. Swap out data availability. Oops, update the security council. Yeah, they'll be doing, on Tally, organizations do everything that an organization does. Capital formation, operations, HR, payroll, M&A, they do all of it on Tally, right? And so on an average day, they'll be doing something that will be critical to the operation of the organization, but it might not be spending money, right? It might just be like, let's update the colors, right? we all want to update the colors, or like, let's have a party, or like, let's mint everybody an appreciative commemorative NFT. And that's great.
I hear you.
That builds the muscle of decision making, of consensus forming.
And in that future, the role that Tally will be playing is enabling all of these agreements to happen, and mostly on chain.
Yeah, always on chain.
Great. Thank you
Awesome.
so much for
Thank you.
being here.
My pleasure.
Appreciate it.